And also, you also see on the opposite side the struggle of empowerment, and I'll just mention a couple, 1886 and the struggle for 40 hours. The 40-hour work week, primarily in immigrants, in the forefront of that struggle. And you move all the way down to the present. You see immigrants in terms of empowerment in the Obama campaign, in the present struggle against capitalism, against the empire, the embarrassment of the empire in 2006. Let me say this: the immigrant rights struggle is divided into two stages. 1968 is born, and it travels to 1986. And that's 18 years. And in those 18 years, you have the foundation, the founding of the first immigrant rights organization. And it was called CASA, Autonomous Center for Social Action, Centro de Acción Social Autónomo, and it was founded here in Los Angeles in the midst of the Vietnam War, in the midst of the coups that were taking place then. Chile is one, the civil rights movement as a whole, and the Chicano civil rights movement in particular. The founder, a man by the name of Bert Corona, born in El Paso, Texas, and he was the son of Villista meaning a soldier of the Mexican Revolution under Pancho Villa. And they lived in Juarez, in both, twin cities, Juarez and El Paso. And so the old man, as we call him, in his older years, was born in, let's say, in the midst of the Mexican Revolution, amongst Mexican revolutionaries, and from there he moved on, and in the 30s, after getting some education, he gets a scholarship to USC to become a basketball player, and he leaves and he becomes a longshoreman. He enters the movement, and in the last consecutive decades, he becomes a leader. And so he sees the experience. He sees the experience of the Great Depression and the mass deportation of Mexican people in the 30s, and then in the 40s, and then Operation Wetback in the 50s, and in this process, he also gains a conception, a working class conception of society. So obviously, he's a lefty. He was a lefty, he was a progressive, and he moves on. And as I said, 1968, this organization is founded, and a whole new group of people come in, and this organization establishes the arteries, the veins of the immigrant rights movement, which is so vast now, from the get-go, from zero. There were only two organizations that were dealing with immigrants then. It was CASA, totally independent, thousands of members, dues-paying members, identification card, and organizing in other areas of struggle, of empowerment, of bringing them in, of putting them in the process. And then there was another one that was government funded, and it was called One Stop Immigration. Those are the two. And from there on, you move on, and in the 1970s, it moves on. It creates ground, experience, organization, empowerment, leadership, and then comes 1982. And there's the final stage, 1982 to 1986, and you see the coming together of IRCA, the Immigration Reform Act of 1986. And that was a 4-year intensive process in this last stage. Very much like today we are in the fourth year, except that it was smaller. The largest demonstration that we had then, 1984, May 19, We mounted it on the Jesse Jackson campaign, that historical campaign for president, and we had 10,000 people with Jesse, my brother, and a few other people, and all kinds of politicians, black politicians that came through for us. So we had the biggest march, and that was the last big push that set us forward to 1986 and the passage of ERCA. And it was signed by Ronald Reagan, President Ronald Reagan. This is the man that in 1971 signs the first anti-immigrant law in the state, and that was the Dixon-Arnett Bill, 1971, and it called for employer sanctions. Essentially what Obama's implementing now, the E-Verify system, and you know, the other measures that are taking place now against immigrants. Well, it was Reagan who signed it as governor, and it was overturned. It was overturned through a mass struggle, young mass struggle, and also the courts. Pretty much like 1994 with Proposition 187. So we empower, as I was saying a while ago, it has to do with empowerment. So in 1986, 18 years of struggle, the empowerment came for 4 million people. There was approximately 6 to 7 million undocumented workers then, and over 4 million and their families were empowered. So that created a whole chain of boom, you could call it, a civic participation, of unionization, voting, electoral struggles, and so forth. And at the same time that the bill was signed, the law was signed, and it began to be implemented, the ink had not been dried yet on the law when we began to struggle for this next stage. Why? Because 2.5 million workers were left out of the bill, out of the law, were left out of the code. Okay, they could not qualify. They could not qualify because they did not enter the country before 1982. A minute, an hour before 1982, they were not let's say creative enough to embellish, you know, the application. So they were left out of the game, and so we began the struggle with civil disobedience, with sit-ins, with demonstrations, press conferences, demanding, struggling, fighting for, speaking of the human rights of these people. So we're moving on. So from there, we move on to 1993. And here, let me interject this. The extreme right began to organize in 1979. John Tanton, FAIR, they established an organization called FAIR, Federation for American Immigration Reform, and that's who's been directing this whole anti-immigrant campaign, or set of campaigns, anti-immigration laws, and measures and politics and moves in the media, Lou Dobbs and so forth. That's where the ideological, intellectual, political direction comes from. This center, this sort of like a nerve center, this is John Tanton, a racist. The organization is tied to the white extremist groups, anti-hate groups, the Heritage Foundation, and the Mellon Skate family, and others.